There is a moment in America's history that I feel acts as a beacon of the extremes of rational human progress and irrational free-spiritedness. I'm thinking of the ambitious Apollo 11 missions and the chaos of the Woodstock Music Festival. Even more strange is how they happened within the same year. Joseph Heath sheds some light on modern society's constant struggle between rational thought and intuitive thinking. He challenges our ideals when it comes to the use of reason when coupled with emotion. We take a look back in history and draw some comparisons between the use of reason, its impact on science, and its contrast with anti-rationalism.
An outrageous display of weirdos going way, way out.
A trend that started in the late 1960s. He shows us why people may feel a distrust of logical reasoning because of the negative implications that reason has left on our society's history. We learn that reason can be coined for the betterment of society, but unfortunately, also for the worst. In modern politics, a lot of the content that's produced is made for a reason, and it's repeated time and time again.
We're building a beautiful wall. I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me. As I say, crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary.
Until it has a subliminal effect on the common viewer. This is called a talking point strategy, which is deployed to win people's hearts, usually to build up people's negative opinions on a political opponent.
And what Canadians saw this evening is someone with a complete lack of judgment and integrity, and someone who's not fit to govern this country.
We're in a stark reality.
All of this with the global warming.
Where we're constantly faced with the question of what feels true.
Okay, it's a hoax.
Instead of thinking through the consequences to determine whether something really is true. This is a common theme when political parties try to appeal to our cognitive biases in order to win the hearts and minds of the populace. By using and repeating key phrases, the representative creates associations of their target so they can be picked up by the common viewer or to appeal to their gut feeling.
Decision. Does the president still believe climate change is a hoax?
This political strategy is interesting to me. Ideally, politics should tell you the truth, but instead, they're discharging phrases which force the viewer to question their truthiness, or in other words, being felt true even if it's not necessarily true. By abusing people's belief and confirmation bias, political parties and advertising agencies successfully give the people what they want to hear, by dumping information that has nothing to do with the problem at hand. Instead, it pushes people's buttons by appealing to their hearts rather than their heads. Rationalism is challenged through this book, but here, Heath sheds some light on the criticism of reason during the second half of the 20th century. During this time, anti-rationalism was at the forefront of the discussion, particularly throughout the feminist and environmental movements.
Of a movement that women are human beings and that we have equal rights.
Through to the present day. The 1960s were a spectacular time in the age of reason and expanding the frontier of knowledge. Events such as when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong became the first men to arrive on the moon during NASA's Apollo 11 mission. This was also a time when the music scene was on a major rise, put on display during the famous Woodstock concert of 1969, featuring headliners such as Jimi Hendrix and The Who. This was a psychedelic time where people were grooving to the music, expressing their emotions while literally dripping in wine and blood. That year, Ayn Rand delivered a lecture called Apollo and Dionysus, where she outlines the fundamental conflict of our age. That is to say, reason versus irrational emotion. She goes on to explain the contrast between Apollo, the god of light, and Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. Apollo represents beauty order, wisdom, and advocacy. But Dionysus, on the other hand, is a symbol of drunkenness. Rand's objective here is to elicit the divide between reason and unreason.
All right. Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality.
But where does this divide come from? Two distinct evils arose with the help of reason. The first being highly systematic killing.
World War II.
We see this in the German death camps, where the Nazis rounded up millions of Jews and later exterminated them. The process was methodical and thoroughly thought out. The second major evil was the convergence of science and technology being used to amplify the capacity to kill. Combining these two evils was devastating. They both required an enormous amount of human creativity and innovation to slaughter humans by the thousands. This in fact went against the Enlightenment's ideals of liberty and progress. Heath explains, the sight of science in the service of inhumanity was an enormous blow to the prestige of the Enlightenment, and its view that the progress of reason went hand in hand with the betterment of humanity. At this point, reason seemed neutral in the struggle between good and evil. When used for evil, reason goes against any of our sought-after progressive ideals. Rationality began to be thought of as an instrument which could be used for any purpose, good or bad. Was it in fact neutral? No, in fact it wasn't. Reason is what drove these technological advances that were ultimately responsible for these evil acts. Which makes sense. As we've seen earlier, sound decisions cannot be made based on reason alone. They need to be coupled with emotion. And in this case, the scientific method being used to advance the body of knowledge tends to require objectivity, emotional detachment, and manipulation of certain conditions to work.
The frontiers of knowledge.
But this methodology encourages objectifying the subject, and in this case people, removing yourself from their suffering and treating them with indifference. Beyond this time emerged the standard template for late 20th century anti-rationalism.
If you watch television at prime times, advertising is not concerned about poverty, not concerned about race oppression, not concerned about the police.
Which introduces two different types of reason. Technical rationality, which is the bad kind of reason associated with scientific research and nuclear weapons manufacture. So in our society, we've given priority to the good kind, which was coined by the name of objective reasoning, or post-technological reasoning. It's during the feminist movement of the 1960s where we really see the realization of objective reasoning. Technical rationality was thought of as being from male origin, while a female rationality stemmed from being more inclusive, interactive, and compassionate, or, in other words, more emotional. These roles prompted gender stereotyping.
Most men would have a hard time of it if they were to change jobs with wife, mother, or girlfriend.
Yet, the truth is, there is an unsurprisingly little difference between the way men and women reason. Therefore, reason is universal, and men's intuition is just as capable of making mistakes as women's intuition is. And there is no difference between women's cognitive biases to men's. I believe that reason is an important facet in everyday society. However, we must use emotion to inform those decisions of our reasoning. We are in a constant struggle to decide what's best for society. Throughout history, the Enlightenment has been tested by the impacts of scientific reasoning and the potential evils it may cause. It doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, scientist, or free spirit. Collectively, we all have a role to play in propelling the bounds of progress.